now, you're probably thinking, what the hell is he on about with showing an aquatank as the thumbnail? Well, we've all played on multiplayer, right? We've all jumped into generated maps, jumped into the aquatank and been like, holy moly, I'm floating on water. I mean, that's great, but it does have a major downside. The aquatank holds a bazooka and a mortar, and that is where we come into the most pointless weapon in the entire game, the aquatank mortar.
Look at this! Look! 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 What the fuck is this?
When you use the mortar in the heavy weapons class, you are looking to deal anywhere between 50 and 110 HP's worth of damage. Meanwhile, the mortar on the aquatank deals 15 HP's worth of damage, for a total of 60 HP's worth of damage. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, when you hit someone with that first shell, you will deal 15 HP's worth of damage, and each individual shell also only deals 15 HP's worth of damage. So we have 4 shells that have exactly the same amount of damage dealt, like I said, dealing the maximum, if you're able to get the full max from it somehow, of 60 HP, which makes this weapon incredibly pointless. And why it exists, I have no idea. I even went back into the beta version of Hogs and tested this in the multiplayer, and it was still the same. So this was a deliberate decision, or somebody completely missed it and just didn't take any notice of it and just thought, you know what, yeah, it's fine. It can basically be a melee weapon for the aquatank, for this vehicle to deal such a tiny amount of damage. When we look at weapons and abilities that deal small amounts of damage in Hogs of War, they are usually compensated with high amounts of knockback. For instance, the shockwave or the shock shell in the artillery. But this is it's just so far out of left field. It feels like a mistake, but like I said, going back into the earlier versions, the fact that the damage numbers are still the same means that that was a deliberate choice. Why? I have absolutely no idea. And you know, when thinking about this video idea, and I try and find an angle to make this weapon viable in some way, to try and think of a situation or scenario where it could be utilized. And the strange thing is that when we look at the aquatank's history, when we see that it was trialed in single player, when it was on mission 13, it still had the mortar there. Why? I do not understand. It's those 3 additional shells that kind of give away that this was a deliberate choice as well, because those are also set, as I mentioned, to 15 HP. If those were set to 20, then maybe you could say, well, that first explosion was a mistake, that was kind of a design mistake, that someone didn't input the right numbers in, that should be 50, not 15. But again, the fact that everything is 15 damage, I don't know.
Why you do this?
The only solace you can take from the most pointless weapon in Hogs of War is that you are technically dealing more damage than a bayonet, but at the same time you're dealing the same amount of damage as a knife and less damage compared to a cattle prod or a sword. So when it comes to melee weapons, they definitely have the upper hand against the tank. But don't forget that you cannot melee any kind of vehicle. Do not do it. It's really not worth it. You'll end up looking like a silly person. Nevertheless, the aquatank, as we have seen in many videos I've made before, I wish in so many regards that it could be in single player, that it could be more viable in the maps that we have in multiplayer, and that it's not just locked to the likes of generated maps. But let me know your thoughts on everything in the comments. Do you feel that there is a even more pointless weapon? Because I would argue that the bayonet in a lot of situations can still be important. It is one of the worst weapons in the game. I think both bayonet, aquatank mortar, suicide, and maybe even special ops, those 4 are very much on par with each other. But as I mentioned, let me know your thoughts on everything in the comments below. This has been a weird video, but I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one, comrade. Peace out, everybody. Oh, and one last thing, for those of you that might be interested, I do have a second channel which has a tendency to fluctuate in content from time to time. But over the past year, I have settled upon this channel for my voice work, where you'll find the previous endeavors of my employers posted. And do prepare for consequences. My employers are not quite so trusting, and rather than continually subject you to the irresistible human temptation of telling all, we have decided to convey you somewhere you can do no possible harm, and where no harm can come to you. I'm sure you can imagine there are worse alternatives.